And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
New guidance for 2025, and you outlined the cost impact of the tariffs that are in place.
From the CEO of the nation's largest automaker, General Motors, about the impact of the tariffs on the car industry.
In May 2025, General Motors stunned investors by withdrawing its full-year financial guidance, citing potential losses of up to $5 billion linked directly to newly imposed U.S. tariffs. The announcement sent shockwaves across Wall Street and Washington alike, as it marked the most serious warning yet that protectionist policy may be endangering one of America's most iconic manufacturers. At the center of the crisis is a package of aggressive import tariffs introduced by the Trump administration, including a 25% tax on foreign-made vehicles and key automotive components. According to internal estimates, these measures could make it financially unviable for GM to maintain its current production strategy, particularly when competing against global automakers that aren't facing the same cost penalties. Facing this dramatic shift in economic landscape, GM CEO Mary Barra issued a pointed statement. "We are exploring all options to ensure cost competitiveness globally." The implications are extraordinary. A company that once symbolized American manufacturing might is now actively reevaluating its global footprint simply to survive on U.S. soil. In an ironic twist, a policy intended to strengthen domestic industry is pushing its most visible champion toward the exit. Globalization, once a choice, is now a survival strategy. Long before the latest wave of import tariffs pushed General Motors to the brink, the company was already grappling with deep structural challenges, most of them rooted in the rising cost of domestic production and the relentless pace of international competition. Over the past 2 years, GM has heavily invested in its transition to electric vehicles (EVs), betting on US-based assembly lines and vertically integrated supply chains. While this strategy aligned with the Biden administration's push for domestic EV manufacturing, it left GM heavily exposed to inflationary shocks in critical inputs. Prices for key materials like aluminum, lithium, and steel have surged globally, in some cases by over 40%, making US-based production significantly more expensive than international alternatives. At the same time, foreign competitors such as Hyundai, BYD, and Volkswagen have rapidly gained ground in global EV markets. These firms benefit from lower-cost manufacturing bases, extensive state support, particularly in China, and a more flexible international sourcing model. As a result, they've been able to undercut GM on price while accelerating deployment of new models in key markets like Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. GM, by contrast, has found it increasingly difficult to maintain competitive pricing while relying primarily on US-based production. Labor costs, environmental regulations, and logistical constraints, while important pillars of responsible manufacturing, have collectively eroded GM's margin space at home, especially in the fiercely price-sensitive EV segment. This mounting imbalance meant that even before the Trump tariffs took effect, GM was operating at a disadvantage, caught between its domestic manufacturing commitments and a global market moving faster and cheaper than the US system could support. In that context, the tariffs didn't create GM's crisis, they simply pushed a fragile model past its breaking point. The tipping point in GM's financial crisis came not from within the company, but from a sweeping shift in federal trade and industrial policy. In early 2025, the Trump administration reinstated a set of aggressive tariffs and domestic sourcing requirements as part of its revived America First economic agenda, a move designed to reassert control over manufacturing and reduce foreign dependency. At the center of the policy shift was a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and automotive components applied broadly to products originating from Mexico, Canada, and the European Union, all major trade partners in GM's integrated supply chain. This measure alone threatened to add billions in new costs across GM's operations, given the company's heavy reliance on cross-border parts flow and just-in-time logistics. Compounding the pressure was the administration's re-implementation of the Buy American mandate, requiring large corporations, particularly federal contractors and automotive manufacturers, to significantly localize their supply chains. While the policy plays well in populist politics, industry analysts warn that fully redomesticating such complex global sourcing networks would take years and cost billions, making short-term compliance economically impossible. According to a May 2025 report by Reuters, GM executives estimate that the combined impact of tariffs and sourcing mandates could cost the company up to $5 billion in 2025 out alone. In response, GM made the rare move of withdrawing its full-year financial guidance, citing the unprecedented volatility created by the new trade policy landscape. The current policy environment makes our core business model structurally unviable in the near term, an internal GM source told Reuters. With material costs surging, exports facing retaliatory tariffs abroad, and no feasible short-term path to full supply chain localization, GM's long-standing U.S.-centric operating model collapsed under its own weight. The result is a company forced to choose between political compliance and global competitiveness, with no easy path forward. As General Motors publicly acknowledged the need to reevaluate its global production strategy, former President Donald Trump responded with characteristic intensity, accusing the automaker of betraying American workers. In a series of campaign speeches and online statements, Trump condemned GM's potential move as a violation of national loyalty, invoking the company's historical role as a symbol of American manufacturing strength. In keeping with his hardline stance, Trump threatened to impose retaliatory tariffs on any GM vehicles assembled overseas and then shipped back into the U.S. market. His message was unmistakable. If GM wanted to sell cars in America, it had better build them in America. No American car should be built outside the United States. If they try, they'll pay dearly to bring it back, Trump declared at a May 2025 rally in Ohio. But the political rhetoric glosses over a more complicated industrial reality. General Motors is not a marginal player. It is deeply embedded in the fabric of the U.S. economy. The company directly employs over 140,000 workers in the United States and supports an estimated 1.3 million additional jobs through its national supply chain, including component manufacturers, logistics providers, software vendors, and dealership networks. These are not just numbers. In states like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Texas, GM is often one of the largest private employers, and its presence underpins local economies that have already endured decades of industrial decline. Here lies the contradiction at the heart of the conflict. Trump's protectionist policies were designed to preserve American jobs, yet those very policies are now putting pressure on companies like GM to move production abroad simply to remain financially viable. The harder the administration pushes for compliance, the more vulnerable the business model becomes, not just for GM, but for the broader ecosystem that depends on it. What was once a straightforward narrative protecting American industry from foreign competition has become a case study in unintended consequences, where a policy intended to shield a national champion may now be accelerating its fragmentation. While General Motors has not formally announced a departure from the U.S., its public admission that it is reassessing its global footprint has already sent a clear signal to the international manufacturing community. Opportunity is up for grabs, and America's global competitors are wasting no time moving in. According to Bloomberg, major automakers, such as Airbus in mobility R&D Hyundai and China's COMAC, have stepped up production planning and investment across regions like Southeast Asia and Europe, where they can operate free from the punitive U.S. tariff regime. These companies benefit from lower input costs, access to skilled labor, and governments that are actively courting foreign direct investment, advanced manufacturing. The strategic advantage is clear as U.S. policy narrows the playing field. Global rivals are positioning themselves to capture displaced demand, talent, and capital, all while U.S. firms scramble to remain cost competitive under mounting policy constraints. Back home, the human toll is beginning to take shape. States like Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, long considered the heartland of American auto manufacturing, now face the prospect of tens of thousands of job losses if GM is forced to reduce or offshore production. These are not just assembly line positions. They span a web of Tier 1 suppliers' parts, manufacturers, engineering hubs, and logistics networks that form the bedrock of regional economies. Several Tier 1 suppliers have already issued public warnings about the risk of cascading layoffs, a chain reaction that begins with a slowdown at GM but ripples outward to affect hundreds of smaller businesses and subcontractors. If GM cuts even 10% of its U.S. operations, the impact on downstream suppliers could be immediate and catastrophic, noted one industry executive in a recent Reuters interview. This isn't just a story of one company under pressure, it's a shift in industrial alignment on a global scale. As America's largest automaker reconsiders its options, foreign manufacturers, governments are stepping in to fill the vacuum, offering more favorable conditions for both production and innovation. In doing so, they aren't just absorbing market share, they're quietly redrawing the map of global automotive power. If America's largest automaker finds itself unable to operate competitively on U.S. soil, not because of global competition, but because of U.S. policy, then it's time to ask, is this still economic patriotism, or is it self-inflicted sabotage wrapped in the flag? General Motors is not fleeing the country. It is not abandoning its roots. It is reacting to a set of economic conditions that have made the very act of being American in production, in sourcing, in structure increasingly untenable. So, who exactly is being protected by these policies? Tariffs and domestic mandates may be designed to preserve jobs, industry, and national self-reliance. But when they trigger mass layoffs, crush competitiveness, and hand market share to foreign rivals, the outcome is not strength. It's strategic regression. The very people these measures claim to defend, workers, engineers, small manufacturers, may end up as collateral damage in a policy war waged on principle rather than pragmatism. General Motors now stands at the intersection of ideology and economics. It is not alone. Across industries, U.S. companies are being asked to perform a feat that borders on paradox, remain globally dominant while carrying policy burdens no global competitor has to bear. And as more of these firms begin to balk, question, or relocate the cost of protection, may start to outweigh its political benefits. In the end, this is not just about a company's strategic decisions, it's about a country's strategic vision.